Hello, and welcome to this web discussion on the future of Diego Garcia and the American military facility there. I'm George Beebe. I'm Vice President and Director of Studies at the Center for the National Interest. Diego Garcia is a long way from the United States, but it's right in the middle of a lot of things that are very important to American national security. We've had a military facility on this atoll in the Indian Ocean since the mid-1960s under a long-term arrangement with the United Kingdom. The UK has claimed sovereignty over the Chagos archipelago, of which Diego Garcia is a part, since the 1800s. But Mauritius disputes this claim. And last year, the International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion calling for the UK to end its administration of Chagos as rapidly as possible and allow Mauritius to complete what it called the decolonization of its territory. The UN General Assembly subsequently voted to support the ICJ opinion. But the UK has rejected these claims. These developments raise some important questions for the United States. What really is at stake for the United States and these competing claims over the Chagos? Would continued American support for the UK's claims risk jeopardizing our long-term access to Diego Garcia if and when the UK is forced to give up control of this territory? And how confident can we be in our access if Mauritius ultimately takes control of Diego Garcia? To discuss these questions, we have today a distinguished group of panelists. Ambassador Jagdish Koonjul is the representative of Mauritius to the United Nations and has been a central player in advancing his government's claims to the Chagos. Mark Rosen is Senior Vice President and General Counsel at the Center for Naval Analysis. He's also a retired US Navy captain and an expert in maritime law and conflicting maritime claims. And finally, Dov Zakheim is a former US Undersecretary of Defense, a senior fellow at the Center for Naval Analysis, and last but not least, a member of the board of directors of the Center for the National Interest. I've asked each panelist today to begin with a short opening statement, and then I will open the discussion for questions and answers from the audience. Ambassador Koonjul, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, George. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for this opportunity to provide the Mauritian perspective on the future of Diego Garcia, particularly in the light of the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice and the UN General Assembly Resolution 73295, adopted by a majority of 116 votes to 6. Let me recognize the presence of Paul Reichler of Foley Hoag, who is our legal advisor, and who will be happy to answer any questions of a purely legal nature that may arise. The importance of the defense facility on Diego Garcia cannot be underemphasized. In a statement to the United Nations General Assembly last year, the then permanent representative of the UK described the facility as follows. The defense facility is vital to the maintenance of international and regional peace and security. To the east of Diego Garcia lie the Malacca Straits, transited by cargo vessels, and to the west lies the Gulf of Aden, through which 1/8 of the world trade passes. The defense facility keeps allies in the region and beyond safe and secure, and combats conflicts, terrorism, drugs, crime, and piracy. It supports partners on the Combined Maritime Forces, a partnership of 33 member states from Latin America to the Asia Pacific, and hosts one of the world's 4 GPS stations used widely for military and civilian navigation. Mauritius agrees with this description of the facility at Diego Garcia and recognizes its vital importance. That is why Mauritius has pledged that it will not do anything that can disrupt the good functioning of the facility. Indeed, we too benefit from the stability in the region that the facility contributes to. At the same time, there's a new political, ethical, and legal reality that has been brought to light by the February 25th advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice last year, which was further affirmed by the United Nations General Assembly resolution of May 22nd. That reality makes it clear that the Chagos Archipelago, home to the main island of Diego Garcia, has always been and is an integral part of the territory of Mauritius, and that the UK's administration of the Chagos Archipelago is a flagrant violation of international law, which the UK is under a legal obligation to rapidly bring to an end. The court left it to the General Assembly to set a deadline for the termination of the unlawful British occupation of the Chagos Archipelago, and the General Assembly of the UN determined that 6 months would be sufficient. That period expired on November 22nd, 2019. As much as the US has over the years found the UK to be a very comfortable partner, especially as regards the lease of Diego Garcia, it is now an undeniable fact that the status quo of such an arrangement is no longer sustainable. Purely on legal grounds, the UK is an illegal occupier, refusing to decolonize part of the territory of Mauritius, which it controls illegally. This constitutes an offense to international law, to the United Nations Charter, and to all members of the United Nations. From a political perspective, it is not surprising that within the UK, there is a growing voice calling for the UK to comply with the ICJ ruling. The Labour Party has committed itself to do so when it gets in power. Just a few weeks ago, some 30 parliamentarians from various parties wrote to Prime Minister Boris Johnson asking him to abide by the court's conclusion in order to avoid UK's further isolation and loss of credibility. In short, the prospects of the UK being able to hold on to the Chagos Archipelago in the face of overwhelming international and significant domestic political opposition are simply unrealistic. From an ethical viewpoint, the UK, which has been a founding father of the United Nations and a stalwart defender of the rule of law, must realize that its current stand contradicts all that it represents and seeks to represent as a global power. Already, Foreign Secretary Raab's projection of the UK as a champion of human rights and respect for international law is being met with skepticism. Unless the UK itself is seen to be respecting the rule of law, it will have limited moral authority to enforce it. The bottom line, therefore, is that even in the best scenario, and assuming that the UK is prepared to face international and national pressure, combined with a loss of credibility, come 2036, it will not be possible for the UK to lawfully extend the lease with the United States. We believe, therefore, that it is in the interest of the US to look at ways in which its longer-term interest in the Indo-Pacific region can be guaranteed. And Mauritius is in a position to provide that long-term guarantee. Mauritius has publicly announced that it is committed to entering into a long-term arrangement with the US to guarantee the continued operation of the defense facility in Diego Garcia. In fact, it is prepared to offer a 99-year lease to the US or to the US and the UK if that is what is preferred. We are confident the lease can provide the same benefits, indeed even greater benefits for the US than the lease it currently has with the UK. We reject the notion that peace and stability in our region can only be guaranteed with UK's control over the Chagos Archipelago. Mauritius is a stable and democratic country, respectful of the rule of law and human rights, and it is a living example of peace and tolerance in a multiracial country with a vibrant private sector which contributes to its advanced economy as a recently declared high-income country. Mauritius is also a good friend of the United States. It is keen to further strengthen its relationship with the US by enhancing our trade, investment, security, and cultural relations. Furthermore, there is consensus in Mauritius among all major political parties for the continued operation of the defense facility on Diego Garcia. Inasmuch as Mauritius is committed to the resettlement of its former inhabitants to the Chagos Archipelago, and those who have been forcibly displaced in the 1960s and 70s, we have made it clear that there will be no resettlement on the island of Diego Garcia. Such resettlement is envisaged only on the outer islands, which lie at least 100 miles from Diego Garcia. Mauritius has also made it clear that it will not impose itself on Diego Garcia or interfere in the running of the base, but it does seek to have its legal rights recognized as the sovereign out of a matter of principle and national fulfillment. An arrangement between the US and Mauritius would accomplish this objective while assuring that the US access to and enjoyment of the facility on Diego Garcia remain unchanged. We believe that with the above assurance, it would be logical for the US to choose the option which will guarantee its long-term presence in the region. Mauritius has pursued a foreign policy based on common ideals and interest, mutual respect, and historical, cultural, and traditional links. This accounts for our historically close relationship with both the US and the UK, and also with India. In fact, India stands out as one of the closest partners of Mauritius. And as such, Mauritius will never do anything that would adversely affect India's defense and security interests in the region. This too constitutes an assurance that the interest of the US, which has a close partnership with India, will be protected. Of course, there will be issues that will need to be sorted out, as is frequently the case in friendly negotiations. These include our respective commitments under various other agreements and conventions. But I am fully confident that all these can be settled out of mutual satisfaction, to our mutual satisfaction in the course of discussions of the long-term agreement. I want to conclude with a little piece of history. The United States opened a consulate in Mauritius in 1794, when Mauritius was still under French colonial rule. Between 1786 to 1810, more than 600 ships from the US visited Mauritius. So as we can see, Mauritius and the US have a long history together. We can take and make this partnership even stronger. This is the invitation that Mauritius wishes to extend to the US. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I think you've made a very clear and articulate defense of your government's position on this matter. Mark Rosen, I think you bring an interesting perspective here as both a US Navy captain, retired, and as an expert in international maritime law. What are your thoughts on the issues that the United States is facing here?
Thank you very much, George, and thank you for your remarks, Mr. Ambassador. I've published a number of articles on this general topic, which folks can easily find, but just in the interest of time, I have three main points that I would like to make from a legal and policy perspective. First, Diego Garcia is unquestionably a strategic base from a US perspective and needs to be retained. Indeed, there's some retired officers, well-known retired four-star officers, and I won't name names, who consider Diego Garcia to be the most important US base in the US inventory. Why? First off, logistics. Amateurs talk strategy, but professionals talk logistics. Diego Garcia has a protected anchorage, 2 large runways, and is equidistant from from the Middle East and Asia. The geography cannot be replicated. Also, from a legal perspective, it's very hard to be able to go out around the world and to negotiate the types of logistical arrangements for both ship repair, refueling, airfield, bed down, et cetera, in one sort of package that you currently have in Diego Garcia. Also, Diego Garcia is isolated, and that isolation in this case is splendid, because unlike bases in the US or even in the US, in like the US Navy base in Oceana and Virginia near Norfolk, you have housing developments that are running right up to the fence line. Also, that isolation means that you aren't putting a host nation at risk if the base was ever attacked. Another point, you have a lot of developed infrastructure. The US would not have to go through the appropriations process to get the money to be able to develop it. You also, and this point cannot be stressed enough, would not have to go through the lengthy and laborious permitting and other types of legislative processes to be able to build on that base. You have a stable political environment. Heretofore, the US has accorded the US a great deal of operational freedom, and there hasn't been any risk that the UK would kick the US out of its base in which it has invested literally billions of dollars. And I'm happy to hear, of course, what the ambassador is saying about what Mauritius is willing to do. And lastly, it's a very strategic location, but this base is in a key spot to be able to reaffirm allies, both in the Persian Gulf and in South Asia and in Southeast Asia, and in India in particular. And it can be an excellent venue for collaborative military exercises, joint logistics, and so forth and so on. Point two, the UK position has been heavily weakened by the ICJ and the UN General Assembly actions, and something must be done to ensure continued US, and if UK wishes, UK access to Diego Garcia. Now you can read my papers, but I think it's wrong to simply assume that an ICJ advisory opinion and the following UN General Assembly resolution, even though they may not technically be legally binding, is inconsequential as far as the UK's position is concerned. The US, of course, after the ICJ opinion, said that they regarded the ICJ opinion to be a purely bilateral matter, and they expressed regret that the court had proceeded without the UK's consent to the matter. Now, international lawyers can debate whether or not they are legally binding on the UK, but the facts remains that the case and the subsequent UN General Assembly actions have been overwhelmingly against UK's continued retention, and the political overtones of the UK retaining a colonial possession are not good, especially today. I would also note that a case could be made that the UK is bound by an earlier decision, by a Law of the Sea arbitration decision in 2015, which essentially held that the UK had not complied with a series of agreements of 1965 called the Lancaster House Agreements. The arbitral panel found that the UK had not complied in good faith. It gave some full faith and credit to those decisions. Those decisions state that the UK would retain the base at Diego Garcia so long as they had a valid defense purpose. Think for a minute about who occupies that space. There are 2,500 US personnel and 40 UK personnel. The question is there still a continued valuable UK defense interest in that base? Now, the Lancaster agreements were not given effect by the ICJ, but consider in the background at least another authoritative group has held that the UK has not acted legally in a proper way. On the larger question of whether or not the UK can ignore an advisory opinion by the ICJ and the UN General Assembly actions, I would note that ICJ advisory opinions are binding on UN agencies. So conceivably, the UN can keep the UK in the penalty box forever, for quite a long time if it fails to conform to both the ICJ opinion as well as the UN General Assembly mandates. And so this can affect them in the areas of refugees and so forth and so on, refugee assistance and other areas where the UK relies upon the UN for assistance. And also, I would mention that the political and legal landscape in the UK has changed. The ambassador mentioned that. The most recent case involving some dispossessed folks, Chagossians, that went to the UK Supreme Court in 2016 was decided in the UK's favor in a very narrow margin. I believe it was 3-2. So the solidity of the legal position in the UK courts has been definitely called into question. Lastly, third point, time is not on the side of the US and the UK. You can't use to use a basketball expression, you can't run out the clock on this. And that some sort of action needs to be taken now. Why now? Well, first and perhaps foremost, the current administration in Mauritius seems to be favorably disposed to continued US presence. Mauritius is closely aligned politically with India and culturally, and the US has a growing defense relationship with India. So this can probably help us in order to solidify our position in South Asia. Also, in terms of an agreement, I spent many years as an international lawyer in DOD and also in DHS negotiating international agreements. But some sort of a deal would need to be more than just simply something that's based on lease payments in order to ensure that the base stood the test of time and really went to the 99-year duration. That would mean that there would have to be some sort of economic participation of Mauritian workers in base operations. Maybe even there could be a provision that would allow for the establishment of a shipyard or ship repair facility that the U.S. Navy could make use of. Also, I'm very happy to hear that from the ambassador that there are no demands to resettle former Chagossians on Diego Garcia itself, because there just frankly is not a lot of land. Another thing is that this base would, I think, have to include some security guarantees that the U.S., similar to the security guarantees that the U.S. provided to other allies around the world. The U.S. would allow Mauritius to be compliant with the African Nuclear Weapons Free Zone, and also there would need to be some guarantees that that Mauritius would not lease areas that are near Diego Garcia to competitors like China, and that lastly, the U.S. should be allowed to keep the UK should be allowed to keep access to the facility, both to politically save base and also to satisfy its needs. And last but certainly not least, I think that there needs to be careful study given to what is the legal structure on the base. Would it apply? In my view, it would need a situation where you would apply US laws as it relates to workers and labor law, as well as environmental concerns. So the bottom line is, I think the US has a favorable negotiating partner, and that the time is right, and that the stars seem to be aligned and the opportunity should be seized. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Mark. I think you've done an excellent job of summarizing both the importance of Diego Garcia to the United States and also the legal issues that are involved in all of this and how the United States ought to deal with them. Dov Zakheim, you for many years in your position at the Pentagon were really where the rubber met the road in terms of finding the practical means of implementing US strategy and advancing US national interests around the world. What's your perspective on this issue?
Well, thanks very much, George. And I want to thank the center. I happen to be vice chairman, but I can still thank the center for having me on. And I want to very much thank both Mark and the ambassador. I'm not an ambassador and I'm not a lawyer. And I think you've heard a very strong case, both diplomatically and legally, for why Mauritius is arguing the way it is. My basic concern, though, is that the United States continue to use the facility with the degrees of freedom it's had up to now, without any restrictions that are new or imposed. It's as simple as that. Now, here's our difficulty. We are definitely caught, we as the United States are caught between a rock and a hard place. The British are our closest ally, and we have an agreement with them. As you heard from the ambassador, Mauritius is a good friend, and we've got a great relationship with them. But the fundamental problem is the deal we have is with the British. And so we would have to essentially break that deal. Unless the British and Mauritius can work things out amongst themselves, then we come in with our concerns about our basically freedom to use Diego Garcia and to continue to use it and to build on it as necessary as we have until now. If we were to go to the British and say, look, cut a deal with Mauritius, the ICJ has ruled the way they have, the General Assembly's ruled the way they have, you've heard Mark's very strong legal arguments, they could come back and say, first of all, Mauritius, they hived Mauritius off, Diego Garcia off from Mauritius while Mauritius was still under British rule, even though it had self-government. They could argue, we've done this before. Look, British East Africa was once a single unit. It then became 4 units, Kenya, Uganda, Tanganyika, and Zanzibar. When those 4 units became independent, Kenya and Uganda decided to be independent on their own. Tanganyika and Zanzibar decided to become Tanzania. So this thing can cut both ways, the Brits could argue. They would also argue, we've given compensation to the Chagosians. There were about 420 families. We've done it twice. Maybe we have to do some more, but that's for us, not for you, the United States. The British could also say, look, we actually paid Mauritius £3 million to agree to all of this in 1965. £3 million then is about $72 million today. And if we were to start lecturing the British about payments or lack of payments, they could turn around and say, oh, wait a minute, give back Alaska. You bought it for $7.2 million in 1867. That's worth $125 million today. That's a steal. Give it back to Russia. Or how about giving Louisiana back to France? Jefferson bought it for $15 million. That's $350 million today. That's an even bigger steal. Give it back to France. Don't start telling us, having paid, what we should do. Now, I'm not saying the Brits are right. I'm not saying Mauritius is right. Because again, I'm not a lawyer. But what I can say is, it would be very difficult for us to intervene in this. Because essentially intervention would mean going to the Brits and telling them, you've got to give this up. And we would then be alienating our closest ally that, frankly, unlike Mauritius, has sent its people to fight alongside us, war after war since World War I. It's not an easy thing to do. This has to be sorted out between Mauritius and the United Kingdom. Our interests are pretty straightforward. First, we don't want to pay any money. We essentially forgave the Brits $14 million in 1965. That was our payment. I don't want us to get into a Djibouti experience. Now, I negotiated payments with Djibouti when we extended the airfield there, and they hiked up the rent. We were paying them $30 million. The latest deal is $63 million. I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have negotiations where we pay Danegeld. That's not part of what we do now, nor should it be in future. If we get a 99-year lease, that's great. But then again, we don't have to worry with the Brits whether we would be expelled by a government that, for whatever reason, is anti the U.S. Who knows what 99 years will bring. So we want a guarantee of no expulsion. We want a guarantee that all the facilities can be used as they are now, can be built on, can be expanded, can be modernized. Mark laid that all out. and we want operational freedom. And if you might say, well, why would Mauritius deny us operational freedom? Some of our closest friends have denied us operational freedom. In 1973, during the airlift to the Middle East, almost every NATO country wouldn't let us overfly. In the 1980s, when we operated against Libya in the Gulf of Sidra, France wouldn't let us overfly. In 2003, when we wanted to go into Iraq, Turkey wouldn't let us send our troops through. We want complete operational freedom like we have now. So from my perspective, I have absolutely nothing against the case that the ambassador has made. I certainly defer to Mark in terms of the legal structure and the legal basis for the case the ambassador has made. But I would argue that this is something between the United Kingdom and Mauritius. It is very difficult for us to bully the United Kingdom on this one. And if there is a deal, we would certainly support it, but only with the conditions of complete, absolute freedom at no cost, as we have today. And I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dov. I think you've raised some very important considerations in all of this for the United States. I want to note to our audience that to ask questions, simply hover over your Zoom screen, and at the bottom of the screen, you should see some icons that will pop up. One of them says Q&A. So you're welcome to type in questions there into that Q&A function, and then I'll go ahead and pose those to our panelists, and we'll get this discussion going. I'd like to begin by asking a question of my own, and it's for all the panelists here. We've had several different cases made here. I think, Dov, you've made the case that the United States, although it has great stakes in how all this is ultimately resolved, we shouldn't be taking an explicit position either in favor of the UK position or in favor of the Mauritian position. My question is, how much leverage does the United States have on all of this? Would our position be decisive in influencing how this ultimately is resolved? If, for example, we were to back Mauritian claims, would the UK be able to sustain its sovereignty claims under that sort of circumstance? And conversely, if we overtly back the UK, how viable is the Mauritian case over time?
Well, it looks like you're putting the question to me. So let me start with trying to get the UK to give in to Mauritius. First of all, they might not. We've differed with the UK before. They're not exactly our poodles, and they won't necessarily do what we want. In fact, there's been so much debate in the UK about Tony Blair supporting President Bush in the Iraq War, and an argument that they shouldn't necessarily do what America wants. There'll be an awful lot of people pushing against whatever we would want to do, but we would be paying a price, and that is it would be much harder, I think, to work in the kind of on the kind of close terms that we work with the British if we push them in this direction. On the other hand, if we were to reject the Mauritian claim, frankly, it would be very difficult to do. I think you've heard the case. The case is very, very strong. I think there's a lot of sentiment in the United States against any form of colonialism. But again, I think the United States right now is in a very awkward position. We've got a president who basically doesn't really want to pay much attention to allies of any kind, who is interested in America first, who's interested in focusing on domestic issues, and oh, by the way, is running for re-election. This is not a time when American influence is going to be particularly strong one way or another anyway. So I think the issue probably will not get to be addressed until sometime toward the end of 2021, quite frankly, by which time whether it's the current administration reelected or a new administration, the kinds of people who would be dealing with this in government, the assistant secretaries and the undersecretaries, will finally get confirmed by Congress. Because people just don't realize that nowadays you can get into July or August or even September of the first year of a president's term and only then have the senior people who would be dealing with this kind of issue. So quite frankly, for both the reasons that, again, it would be very difficult to side with one of the sides or the other, and for the practical reason that nothing can much happen for the next practically a year, I don't think we should do very much.
Other perspectives on this from Mark or Ambassador Koonjul?
I guess the only comments I'd make is, I mean, I agree with Dov. We have to be extraordinarily careful in how we approach this because, I mean, the U.S. has global interests and has lots of allies. And we can't overtly try to undermine the positions of our allies. I do feel like there's a deal in there. And at the end of the day, you've got to step back and say, what do the parties really want out of this? And clear that Mauritius wants to be able to regain sovereignty. And the UK probably wants to be able to maybe have access to the base and not get out of this basing arrangement with their dignity intact. And I think, candidly, something in which there is an agreement, strictly a personal opinion, there is an agreement in which the UK hangs its hat on the Lancaster agreements and says that we believe that we do not have a overriding defense purpose and that we will be exiting, we will cease our administration of the base and turn it over to Mauritian in a period of years, but retain basing rights after, along with the US after a period of time. I think that might be the sort of deal that might be acceptable to both parties and they would both achieve what they want, as opposed to a winner take all type of scenario, which I don't see the ball moving forward without some sort of a face saving mechanism.
Okay. We have two related questions from the audience. One from Susan Lawrence, one from Michael Vlahos, both raising China. Susan asks, has China made any authoritative statements related to the sovereignty dispute over Diego Garcia? Michael Vlahos asks about China through the prism of international law. By negotiating in good faith with Mauritius, we would demonstrate our fidelity to the international order. Wouldn't that also highlight China's faithless impugning of international law? Comments on this?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, George. I've listened very carefully, of course, to both Dov and Mark, and I agree with what Mark just said, that this is not a case where we want one side to take all. I think there is an absolute possibility to be able to get a kind of a solution that is in the interest of everyone. And it's not just a face-saving device, but it is also to be respectful of the needs of each other. To us, let me say first of all that Susan has talked about sovereignty dispute. We don't consider the issue to be a sovereignty dispute. To us, it is a matter of incomplete decolonization, and the court has given its ruling on the matter of incomplete decolonization. And when it comes to decolonization, it is a matter that is deep-rooted in history, and for any country to be able to maintain a colonial system in this century is, I think, totally unacceptable. So we would like the UK to talk both to the US and to Mauritius And I think together, the three countries should be able to come to a solution that takes into account the needs and interests of each one of us. Now, has China made any authoritative statement? Again, not in relation to the sovereignty dispute, but in relation to the issue of decolonization. China has supported the resolution at the United Nations. And when it comes to decolonization, I think there would be very, very few countries in the world that would say that colonization and colonialism can still be accepted in the world today. So it is an issue more than looking at the immediate future. It is an issue where we are looking at the longer term interest of the United States, and we are willing to engage with the US and with the UK, if that is required, to look at these longer term interests that will go beyond these matter of, there was the Lancaster House Agreement or there was the other agreement. By the way, all that was said were fully considered by the International Court of Justice, and they were one by one rejected by the court. The court made it clear that the Lancaster House Agreement is not an agreement that can be given any validity whatsoever, because it was an agreement between a colonial master and a colonized country. You cannot have an agreement that can be valid under any kind of law. Now, there is another issue about respect for international law. What we want is for countries like the UK and obviously the US, for it to be able to exercise its real soft power and earn the respect of countries and be able to get other countries to abide by the rule of law. It is important that these countries also comply with international law. And by suggesting that the UK may go on holding on to the Chagos Archipelago and not have any kind of concern about getting further humiliated or getting its credibility become more and more tainted. Already, as you can see, the United Kingdom failed to get one of its judges elected at the International Court of Justice for the very first time in the history of the UN, where one permanent member of the Security Council has failed to get a person elected as a member of the International Court of Justice. So if the UK wants to proceed with this type of policy, it is just going to get further humiliated and further isolated. So we think that there is a real possibility for all three parties in this particular case to be able to discuss together and come to a conclusion that is satisfactory to all of us.
Dov, Mark, any thoughts on the China angle?
Well, look, China clearly has always, I mean, from 1949 has always been anti-colonialist, as the ambassador has said. And I think Mike makes a good point that the Chinese aren't exactly the people who abide by international law. Look at the South China Sea. I think that there has to be a kind of process for this to work out. The ambassador has made it very clear that this can be worked out without, or maybe beyond just an issue of face saving, and that's good. But at the end of the day, it's the Brits that have to come to us and say, look, we've decided to work something out with Mauritius. You're operating on Diego Garcia. You need to be part of the discussion. If that were to happen, and by the way, I'm not speaking for CNA any more than I think Mark is, but if that were to happen, then clearly we would sit down with Mauritius and Britain, and we might actually be an honest broker here, and try to work out a deal. We've done that before. We've done that many, many times before. I can go back to 1905 when Teddy Roosevelt ended essentially the Russo-Japanese War and won a Peace Prize for it. So we would certainly approach this in good faith. We have interests. I've laid those out. I haven't heard the ambassador say anything about contravening those interests. So that's a good thing. We know the Brits don't want to contravene those interests. So if the Brits came to us and said, look, we recognize that we've got to work something out with Mauritius, but you have a strong interest, you, the United States, where do you stand? And I would suspect that we would turn around and be very positive and say, sure, we'll work with both of you.
Okay, we have a question from Jeffrey Kemp of the Center for the National Interest, and he brings in a very important, I believe, practical consideration in all of this, and that is that Diego Garcia has a mean height of 4 feet above sea level. Is there not a threat that rising sea levels pose to the viability of the U.S. facility there over time? How serious is that threat, and what kind of time frame might we be looking at here?
This is Mark Rosen. I've read a couple of reports, and I do know that the U.S. Navy has invested a fair amount of money in climate change adaptation things like seawalls and other things to deal with the problem of sea level rise. I don't have an exact time frame for when will it reach a critical juncture, but the issue of sea level rise is not certainly passed unnoticed by defense planners, and money has been invested in trying to come up with abatement measures because, as I indicated, everybody recognizes the strategic importance of that base.
There's generally a sense that there are a lot of Indian Ocean island nations that are threatened by climate change. And those that are friendly with the United States would probably be looking to us for some help in that regard. But certainly we take climate change seriously. And as Mark said, the Navy especially takes climate change seriously.
Yeah, I think similar views from us also. Climate change does affect island countries much more than they do others, because precisely because of the fact that they are so shallow, and also because they lack necessary resources to be able to build things like walls, etc. But certainly, I think if Defense Department is investing in ensuring that climate change does not affect Diego Garcia as well as other islands in the Indian Ocean, this is something certainly that we all appreciate and look forward to.
We have a question from retired Rear Admiral Michael McDevitt, who says that as he understands that the U.S. has long ignored International Court of Justice rulings that apply to it, and points out that it would be very hard to imagine any U.S. Secretary of State pressing London to acquiesce to an ICJ ruling with which it disagrees. Any comments on this?
Well, first of all, let me tell the audience that Mike McDevitt has probably written the most astute piece on Diego Garcia. Those of you who want to read it, it's in War on the Rocks. And it's a really good article that gives you a sense of what this is all about. I don't personally believe that it would be the ICJ that would prompt us to do anything about this Diego Garcia case. Again, maybe it's because I'm not a lawyer, but Mike's right. We haven't paid much attention to the ICJ for a host of reasons. On the other hand, because Mauritius is a friend, because we want to be sure that we have our long-term interests protected. As I said, if the Brits were to come to us for whatever motive, you know, whether they want to give in to the ICJ, whether there's a labor government, whatever it might be, change of heart on the part of Dominic Raab, it doesn't really matter. If they were to come to us and say, look, we want to work this out with Mauritius, you have a vested interest in Diego Garcia, we need you to participate, I would have a hard time imagining that we would say no to the Brits or to Mauritius.
Yeah, this is Mark. I would note that just a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. issued a statement about China and the South China Sea and directly drew in the arbitration decision involving the Philippines versus the Philippines versus China, and invoked certain portions of that agreement, of that decision. All I would say is, yeah, ICJ opinions, international arbitrations, and so forth. I mean, the U.S. withdrew from the mandatory jurisdiction of the ICJ after the Nicaragua mining case. But I mean, there are times when you look at boundary disputes and things of that sort, even our own State Department, when they analyze cases, they will look at those decisions. So, you know, I'm not sure I agree totally with Mike that we basically turn our backs on these decisions. Now, there is a legitimate issue in this particular case where the UK was not, quote unquote, a party to the decision and objected to the jurisdiction. And so getting dragged into court without your consent is a bit of a problem, although China made the same argument in the South China Sea case. So I think it's an ambiguous situation, and that the US has not totally turned its back on international decisions when it suits our when it suits our purposes in terms of trying to promote a public order.
Yeah, I think that the China case and even other contentious cases of a bilateral nature, they are very different from what we have in this particular case. It is true that in a case where there is a bilateral dispute, there is need to have consent from both sides. And had this been a bilateral dispute and UK would have objected to give its consent, we would have certainly understood that maybe UK has a reason not to comply. Although, you know, when you go to the court, you expect that both sides will comply. In this particular case, it is, as I had said before, it is a case of decolonization, where the UK tried to bring arguments relating to the rule of consent. And the court has deliberated extensively on that. And there have been separate opinions also that have been expressed by various judges, where it has, there is a consensus, and the consensus is very significant in the sense that all 14 judges of the court, including the US judge, agreed that the court had jurisdiction to deal with the matter. And then when it came to the merits, 13 out of the 14 judges ruled that the decolonization of Mauritius has not been completed. Now, there is a question as to how binding the International Court's opinion is. Now, many will argue that the court's opinion may not be binding. But what we are pointing out, and which is exactly what the court has said, that UK has breached international law, first by dismembering the territory of Mauritius prior to our independence, and this is itself in contradiction with several UN resolutions, which specifically required that colonial masters should not dismember territories prior to independence. Second, the rule of self-determination has not been properly applied by the UK, in the sense that when the accession took place, it did not consult the whole territory of Mauritius to seek whether there was any kind of agreement to the to the excision of the Chagos Archipelago. So what we see in this case is that the court has ruled that there has been contravention of international law, and this constitutes a wrongful act by the UK, in respect of which there is UK's responsibility that is engaged. It's UK's international responsibility. So the need for the UK to comply with the advisor opinion does not come from the advisory opinion per se, but it comes from international law itself, which in this case has been flouted. So for any country, and especially a country like the UK, which has been such a protector and such a defender of the rule of law, to now come and say that it should not be bound by that same international rule of law, I think it is just inconceivable. And that is why I think friendly countries, especially a country like the United States, needs to use its influence on the UK, especially when there is every possibility of not only continuing to protect US interests in the region, but also to have a longer term guarantee for such interests to be protected to do so. So that is how we see this matter.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one final question. This is from Nalanthi Samaranayake. She asked, can the ambassador comment on news reports about India's efforts to build a base at the Agalega Islands and the status of this effort?
Well, I thank you, Nalanthi. I don't quite think that, you know, that India is building a base there. I think what India is doing, and this is what Mauritius has asked India to do, is to build the landing, the jetty and the landing strip, because Agalega is one of those places where we have got a small population. And for us to be able to bring supplies to those people has always been a major issue. There is no jetty. There isn't even a proper landing strip. So what India is doing, and this is, you know, we are very thankful to India, is that currently it is in the process of building this landing strip and building the jetty. In fact, the jetty is almost ready, because I recently heard that the first ships have now been able to dock almost very close to Agalega. So that will make it much easier for our people to be able to obtain necessary supplies in time. And also whenever there is any evacuation that is required because of illnesses and all that, it would be possible for our Coast Guard planes and all that to pick them up.
All right, very good. Well, I think our time is rapidly drawing to a close. I want to thank all our panelists for what I think was a very rich discussion. Generally, policymaking is making hard choices among issues that are in tension with one another, and weighing the different trade-offs that are involved. And I think that is certainly true when it comes to the future of Diego Garcia, and our discussion today has highlighted that. So once again, thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to the audience, and we'll look forward to our next event.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.